What if the secret to building an empire from nothing wasn't some modern-day life hack, but was actually buried in one of history's greatest wealth stories? And what if the man at the center of that story built a fortune so vast it's almost unimaginable, only to die with a fraction of it? This is the story of Andrew Carnegie, a penniless immigrant who became one of the richest men in the world. But it's also the story of a man who crushed his workers to build that fortune, and then spent the rest of his life giving it all away. Was he a hero or a villain? A ruthless robber baron or a peerless philanthropist? The answer, like the man himself, is complicated. And within that complexity lie forgotten wealth-building lessons that are just as powerful today. This is History's Wealth Playbook, and today, we're unlocking the strategies of Andrew Carnegie. His journey from a Scottish weaver's cottage to a towering steel empire reveals timeless lessons you can use today, showing how historical strategies can inspire modern wealth building and legacy. So stick with us, because the principles he used to build an empire from nothing are the same principles that can redefine your own approach to money, ambition, and success. The Penniless Immigrant. Andrew Carnegie's story begins not in a boardroom, but in a cramped, one-room weaver's cottage in Dunfermline, Scotland. Born in 1835, he was the son of William Carnegie, a skilled and respected handloom weaver. The family was proud, with a strong tradition of self-education and political activism. But pride was no match for the Industrial Revolution. When steam-powered looms arrived in the 1840s, the craft that had supported the Carnegies for generations became obsolete almost overnight. William Carnegie couldn't find work. Andrew would later write about the sting of this moment, saying, "I began to learn what poverty meant. It was burnt into my heart that my father had to beg for work. And then came the resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man." The family's situation grew desperate. Andrew's mother, Margaret, became the primary breadwinner, mending shoes and running a tiny grocery shop to keep them afloat. Finally, in 1848, with all other options gone, the Carnegies sold their belongings, borrowed money, and set sail for America. 12-year-old Andrew arrived in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, then a chaotic, industrial city in its own right, with little more than a fire in his belly. America was not the promised land they had hoped for. It was hard and unforgiving. His first job was as a bobbin boy in a sweltering cotton mill, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for just $1.20 per week. It was grueling, mind-numbing labor, which he soon traded for an even worse job tending a steam engine in a dark, terrifying cellar. But this brutal introduction to industrial America didn't break him, it forged him. Andrew knew his formal schooling was over, but he decided his real education was just beginning. This relentless drive for self-improvement, born from the trauma of poverty, would become the foundation of his entire life. He made a vow not just to escape poverty, but to conquer it, to climb. While other boys his age were playing, Carnegie was learning. He found a sanctuary in the personal library of Colonel James Anderson, a local iron manufacturer who opened his 400-book collection to working boys on Saturdays. For Carnegie, this was a lifeline. He devoured books on history, science, and literature, convinced that knowledge was the one currency that, once earned, could never be taken away. His big break came in 1849, when he landed a job as a telegraph messenger boy. Carnegie treated it like a masterclass in business. He quickly memorized the streets of Pittsburgh and, more importantly, the faces of the city's most powerful men. He made himself indispensable, not just by delivering messages, but by understanding who mattered and why. His talent was impossible to ignore. He taught himself to decipher telegraph messages by ear, a rare and valuable skill that caught the attention of Thomas A. Scott, a superintendent at the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad. In 1853, Scott hired the 17-year-old Carnegie as his personal telegrapher and assistant. Meeting Thomas Scott was the turning point in Carnegie's life. Scott became his mentor, teaching him the intricate dance of capital, investment, and industry. He saw a reflection of his own ambition in Carnegie and took him under his wing. Soon, Scott presented Carnegie with his first investment opportunity, 10 shares in the Adams Express Company for $500. Carnegie didn't have the money. In a huge gamble, his mother mortgaged their small home to raise the capital. The risk paid off handsomely. The investment began yielding dividends that soon dwarfed his salary. Carnegie had learned his next lesson: leverage mentorship and take calculated risks. He wasn't just working for money anymore, he was learning to make money work for him. Scott then brought him another opportunity, a stake in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company. Again, Carnegie borrowed to invest. A couple of years later, that investment alone was bringing in $5,000 a year, more than 10 times his railroad salary. By his early 20s, he was building a portfolio of investments in bridges, oil, and various railroad industries. He learned to see the web of connections in the new American economy. While others saw trains, Carnegie saw the need for rails, bridges, and fuel. He was starting to think not like an employee, but like an owner of the entire system. The vision of steel. By the end of the Civil War, Carnegie was already a wealthy man, having managed the Union's military railways and telegraphs while his investments flourished. At just 33, his net worth was around $400,000. He had conquered poverty, and yet he felt a pull toward something more. In a famous memo to himself, he vowed to retire from business at 35 and dedicate his life to philanthropy, worrying that the endless pursuit of money would degrade me beyond hope of permanent recovery. But a new age was dawning, and Carnegie was one of the few who could see its shape. This new age wouldn't be built of iron or wood. It would be built of steel. During a trip to England, Carnegie saw the Bessemer converter in action. A furnace that could turn raw iron into strong, flexible steel in minutes instead of weeks. Most industrialists were skeptical of the new, expensive technology. But where they saw risk, Carnegie saw the future. He instantly grasped that stronger, cheaper steel would revolutionize everything, especially railroads. He rushed back to America and abandoned his retirement plans, guided by a new mantra: place all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. Carnegie started buying every piece of the steel production process. He bought iron ore mines, coal fields to be cooked into coke, and fleets of ships and miles of railroad to transport it all to his Pittsburgh furnaces. He controlled everything from the moment ore left the ground to the moment a finished steel rail left his mill. This strategy allowed him to relentlessly drive down costs. But those words were about to be put to the test. While Carnegie played the part of labor's friend, his business partner, Henry Clay Frick, was the iron fist in the velvet glove. Frick was a notorious anti-union hawk. As an economic downturn squeezed steel prices, he was determined to cut wages and break the powerful union at their flagship plant, the Homestead Steel Works. As the union's contract neared expiration, Carnegie conveniently left for his annual trip to a remote castle in Scotland, leaving Frick in charge. Before departing, he gave Frick his full support, writing, "We approve of anything you do. We are with you to the end." Frick moved quickly, demanding steep wage cuts. The union refused. In late June, Frick locked all 3,800 workers out of the mill and built a 12-foot-high barbed wire fence around it, grimly nicknamed Fort Frick by the workers. Then, under the cover of darkness on July 6, 1892, 2 barges carrying 300 armed Pinkerton private security agents floated up the Monongahela River. Their goal was to secretly occupy the plant so non-union scab workers could be brought in. But the workers were waiting. Thousands of townspeople rushed to the riverbank. No one knows who fired the first shot, but a full-scale battle raged for the next 12 hours. When it was over, at least 7 workers and 3 Pinkerton agents were dead. The public was horrified. The state militia was called in, the strike was broken, and the union was crushed. The Homestead strike became a bloody stain on Carnegie's legacy. He tried to distance himself from the violence, but his private telegrams told a different story. When the strike was finally defeated, he cabled Frick, "Life worth living again." This reveals the darkest lesson in Carnegie's playbook: ruthless efficiency comes at a human cost. His obsession with cutting costs, the very strategy that made him rich, led directly to the bloodshed at Homestead. The man who saw himself as a hero of the working class had become their oppressor, and the great paradox of Andrew Carnegie was now fully exposed. The gospel of wealth. The Homestead strike shattered Carnegie's public image, but his empire kept growing. Now in his 60s, the man who planned to retire at 35 was troubled by the immense weight of his fortune. He had long been guided by a philosophy he laid out in an 1889 essay that became famously known as The Gospel of Wealth. In it, he made a radical declaration: "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." This was the final, revolutionary lesson of Carnegie's Playbook. Instead, he focused on building ladders upon which the aspiring can rise. His greatest love was public libraries. Remembering Colonel Anderson, who opened his library to him as a boy, Carnegie wanted to give that same chance to everyone. He spent nearly $60 million to help fund 2,509 libraries across the English-speaking world. His one condition was that the local town had to provide the land and agree to maintain the library, making it a true public partnership. He poured money into education, founding what would become the world-renowned Carnegie Mellon University. He created the Carnegie Institution for Science, a pension fund for professors, and built the iconic Carnegie Hall in New York. He also worked tirelessly for world peace, establishing the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. By his death in 1919, he had given away more than $350 million, the vast majority of his fortune, amounting to nearly 90% of his wealth. The man who was a ruthless capitalist became history's greatest philanthropist, forever changing the scale of giving back. Though he gave away a fortune, about $30 million still remained in his estate, which was passed to his charitable corporation. Conclusion. So, who was Andrew Carnegie? Was he the immigrant who embodied the American dream, a visionary who built an empire from nothing? Or was he a robber baron who crushed unions while preaching about the rights of labor? The truth is, he was all of those things. His story is a study in contradiction. He pulled himself from poverty yet seemed to forget the struggles of the men who worked for him. He was an industrial titan who drove competitors into the ground, yet also a radical philanthropist who believed great wealth was a public trust. His life is a powerful playbook for ambition. It teaches the importance of relentless self-education, finding mentors, taking calculated risks, and having an obsessive vision. But it's also a profound cautionary tale, showing that the pursuit of profit, if unchecked by empathy, can lead to tragedy. Ultimately, Carnegie's greatest legacy may not be the steel that built America, but the libraries that built minds, the universities that fostered innovation, and the very idea that a life of accumulation must be followed by a life of distribution. He set a standard for philanthropy that challenges the wealthy to this day. In the end, his complex story forces us all to ask a timeless question: what is the true purpose of wealth? Next time on History's Wealth Playbook, we'll uncover how John D. Rockefeller's ruthless tactics in the oil industry built an empire that reshaped modern business. You won't want to miss it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And let us know in the comments, was Andrew Carnegie a hero or a villain? #Andrew Carnegie from poverty kid to steel empire.